Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Nat Eliason, and welcome to Nat Chat, where, as you know, or are just finding out, we're currently focusing on what to do as a college student or recent graduate who feels they don't fit in this somewhat broken world of grades, classes, and one-size-fits-all careers. For this episode, I sat down with my close friend and really co-conspirator Adil Majid. He and I went through quite literally all of this together since meeting our freshman year of college, and now we're actually living together in San Francisco. Adil is an extremely skilled designer, working with a startup here in SF called Spire that helps you enjoy life with less stress and less anxiety. But he didn't start out that way, and as we're going to dig into in the episode, he was originally very into consulting, law, maybe politics, but decided that it really wasn't for him. He realized from a number of side projects that he loved doing design work, and he started teaching himself how to do it on the side until he was skilled enough to start working with these different companies and eventually land internships and jobs in it. We ended up covering that whole process along with other pieces like how to manage the expectations of your peers and parents, dealing with depression, and handling uncertainty when you don't have a clear roadmap. Also, when we recorded this, I didn't have a name or anything for the podcast yet. It was the very first recording. We did it over a couple glasses of wine. And as you'll see in the intro, I did end up going with Adil's favorite for what to call this. So all of our notes, links, and other things are going to be available at nateliason.com/podcast. That's nateliason.com/podcast, which I highly recommend checking out after the show if you want to go deeper on anything that we talked about. And with that, let's bring on Adil. All right, and we are live for the first episode of the to-be-named college-based podcast. Adil, thank you for joining me here.
It's awesome joining you.
Yeah.
What are you gonna call this thing?
we're still in the naming process. I know what you're polling for.
I'm polling for Nat Chat.
Maybe one day we'll move it in that direction. We'll get there. But yeah, I mean, I appreciate you coming out all the way from your room to our living room here. But no, seriously, I mean. When I was deciding to start this, trying to create something to help college students get off like the typical path, obviously you and I have been through all this stuff together. So I was really excited to have you on and be able to talk about some of your experience. So just to get things started, tell us a little bit about who you are, what you're doing right now, where you are in life.
Yeah, totally. So I work at a company called Spire. I'm a designer on the team. And what we do at Spire is we make a wearable that measures respiratory patterns and uses that information to tell you whether or not you're tense. So people use this as part of their mindfulness practice, or they use it as part of anxiety, reduction techniques. And I'm the designer on the team. I was the second design hire for software design. We have a separate industrial design team. And I've been there for a year and a half now. It's been a great time.
So you're pretty young. You're 23, right? But you graduated and you were able to have a lot of ownership in this startup doing design work. How did that happen exactly? In terms of, how did you develop those skills that you were able to go and do this? Did you study design in college, or did you, learn it more on your own?
Yeah. So, largely self-taught. As to how I got about the design. And it was really largely an accident as well. I mean, you and I were walking down these dorm buildings together like sophomore year or something. We realized, consulting is not what we want to do. And at that time, we were on this consulting binge. You had just finished an internship. I was really trying hard to get one. And we still didn't really know what we wanted to do. And I sure as hell hadn't figured it out at that time. So I thought maybe, going into business, that's the answer. Right?
What does it even mean, going into business? I feel like we hear that. Yeah. I'm not sure anybody has any idea.
No idea what that means.
But yeah, so we were both in this spot sophomore year. And, we both kind of had this realization coming back from that summer that we really didn't want to get stuck in these traditional paths.
Yeah.
And we ended up doing pretty similar things for a brief period. Yeah. So what was the first thing that got you kind of excited about doing design work?
Yeah, well, it actually goes back before that. I hadn't even realized I was interested in design at the time, but I had spent like the last 1 year obsessing over design details for this political action committee I had started with a few friends. And there's no point.
What was the name of the committee?
Don't worry about the name of the... whatever. It was, in retrospect, kind of funny. There were 6 of us who started it, and we were like 17 at the time. It was incredible that the FEC allowed this, first of all. We called it Six Pack because there were 6 of us and it was a pack. And don't laugh too hard because you were involved as well.
I was involved with that too.
Yeah. And at the time I thought for a while that maybe my future was in law or, something politically related. I quickly ruled that out. But this was back when I was on that binge. And what I would spend all night doing was worrying about the six-pack logo, right? I should have been worrying about the name or the plan or, everything but the logo. But I was staying up all night, like hashing out the logo. And that was because nobody else was there to do it. And I never considered that, logo design or any kind of design would be a career. So that was just like a late night thing. It was only a couple of years later, after putting together tons of, promotional material, logo work for Six Pack, and then, subsequent organizations I was involved in, that I realized that is a legitimate career and that I had been enjoying it all this time. But I was so clouded by, parental influence, friends, just what everybody else was up to that I had never really considered it.
So you mentioned that there were a lot of things that kind of blocked you from seeing it as an opportunity. Was that more from the environment around you in school, kind of pushing people into certain lines of work? Was it more from parents? Was it sort of your own expectations about what you should be doing? What do you think got most in the way of you going after something that was clearly pretty interesting to you?
I don't know if there's one big thing. There's a few things that got in the way. One was, I went to a high school where it was a decent high school. It was not a bad high school by any means, but I wasn't even aware of 90% of the majors that I've encountered in college. I had never seen a line of code in high school. I didn't know that design was a career or even a possibility. That, coupled with my parents were very well intentioned, but they kind of were always pushing me towards engineering, law, or medicine. So I kind of saw the world as engineering, law, or medicine. And on top of that, I didn't even know what engineering was. So I had already ruled that off right off the bat. My dad worked at a semiconductor company. So I would go and I would see, whatever those crazy road mappy designs are with the resistors and lines. And I don't even know what they're called. And I was just so intimidated by them. I was like, no, that's engineering. And that's definitely not me. So I went to college thinking I'd be a doctor or a lawyer or whatever it was I'd started on. And I changed my mind like 100 times. I was everything at some point. So I would say that was the biggest thing that held me back, was I had a very narrow worldview at the time. I just didn't consider other interesting things that I could be doing because I frankly didn't even know they existed.
And you got that exposure through these side projects, right?
Yeah, exactly. By mistake.
So how did you kind of get started? Because, we've both done a lot of projects together over the years. Like, you've done a ton on your own. I've done some on my own. We've been involved in a lot of them together. What do you think started that habit for you? Like, is there a first big project you can remember? Was it driven by boredom with school? What kind of got you in that habit? Because it seems like it had a big influence on you ending up where you are now.
Yeah, this would probably be a deeper dive into my psyche post high school.
We can do that.
We can go into a little bit. I'll just tell the relevant part. Relevant part was, I had all these very smart, academically inclined friends in high school, and I just frankly wasn't as interested, and I didn't do as well. So when I went to college, my general mentality was like, okay, I need to put my head down, and whether I like something or not, I need to work hard and get good grades. And that was very limiting. That was one thing. Another one was, I just wasn't, I didn't think it was possible to look at anything else. It was just, I had this very, very narrow view on what was possible. And you were a big part in breaking that, because it was that conversation I referred to earlier. We're walking down and we decided we didn't like consulting, where it kind of dawned on me. I was like, yeah, there are other things. And it was just like, I just felt like I had woken up.
Yeah.
And then I started, considering what are the things that I like? And I stopped seeing it from what jobs do I know of and what can I do? Instead of, I started looking at it as what do I enjoy doing already in my free time? And to answer your question more directly on these side projects, I was really into politics and just general reading about policy throughout high school, throughout doing debate in high school, and that continued into college. And that first project was Six Pack, that political action committee. And I didn't know I was doing design at the time, but I was. And then after we shut Six Pack down, there was Student Voice, which actually went quite well. But again, with Student Voice, I was doing a lot of the original branding work. We held a conference that year. I basically put together all of the, printed and, advertising materials for that as well. I still hadn't realized that it was design. I still thought I was, let's do politics or law or, whatnot.
Yep.
It was only later that I realized it was a legitimate career path. So those are the first projects.
Do you remember kind of when you realized oh, shit, I'm a designer and I like doing it?
Yeah, I do. It's embarrassing how long it took. So a little bit of background is, we did this six-pack stuff, we did the student voice stuff, and it must have been junior year now. I still thought this was when I was in my business mode. So we had my policy mode, then we had my business mode, and I still had no idea what I really wanted to do. And a friend of mine named Varun was working on a startup called Open Curriculum. And we actually didn't know each other at the time. We were friends after that. So I applied to intern there. And I got the internship. And I don't even remember what my title was. Like, it definitely wasn't design. I have no idea what it was. And I was interning there, and Varun noticed I was, good at public speaking. And I was pretty confident in public speaking settings. And he had just applied to Y-Combinator and needed, frankly, someone who was, good at public speaking in the interview room. So he invited me and put me on the application and what. Actually, I wasn't on the application. He asked to add me after the fact. I don't know if I can say that. Am I allowed to disclose that? Anyway, yeah, so I ended up in that interview room with Varun applying to Y-Combinator, and we got in, despite the fact that the company was failing, and we were very upfront about it. We told them, we're like, look, the numbers aren't good. Here's our turnaround plan, and somehow we got in. And then I'm in YC, I'm doing business development, and we had just added a new guy to our team named Jonathan Chen, at WikiChen on Twitter. Awesome Twitter.
Amazing Twitter feed.
Yeah,
it's true.
Awesome Twitter, John. Hopefully this podcast gets lots of views so you can get more followers. But yeah, so John was a designer on our team, and I was watching John do his work, and I was like, damn, I'd way rather be doing what he's doing than do what I'm doing. Yeah. Especially because what I was doing, even as far as business development goes, was the worst. We're trying to sell an education product to schools in the spring semester. It's basically the one time they're not buying anything, right? Yeah. So that was when I realized. That was when I saw what John was doing. I was like, wow, I've done that before. And I learned a lot from John. He and I were roommates during that time. That was kind of what set me off.
And from that, obviously, you kind of kept getting better and better at doing design. And I assume that kind of after YC and having that experience, you sort of knew that you wanted to do some sort of design work after college, right?
Yeah.
But you pretty much kept doing it on your own, right? So you weren't really taking classes as much on it. It was really very self-directed. So what actually helped you get better and better and better at it? What led you to the point where you could just reach out to companies and apply directly for more experienced roles than the typical college student graduating? How did you get really good at it?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm really good yet. Hopefully one day.
You're really good. We're going to put some of Adil's stuff in the show notes, and you can see he's very good.
Hopefully one day. But total, I'd say there were 4 things. So first thing was I had good mentors. There were multiple people who I went to fairly regularly, and they would, tell me how I was doing on my projects, personal projects, whatnot. And they were very honest.
And sorry to interrupt, but how did you find those mentors that you went to?
So I happen to know some folks who are, pretty good designers.
Okay.
And then my first mentor, like I said, was John.
Yeah.
There was a period of time where, frankly, it was a little dry. There weren't that many people I was talking to regularly. So I actually remember I posted on Designer News, which is a less popular hacker news for designers, which is still a great community. And I posted some of my work there, and I just asked them to rip me apart. And there were just there was amazing feedback. This is one guy, I'll still remember, his name was Benjamin Rogers. He was from Boston. And I remember that because I wanted to see him when I went to Boston. It just didn't work out. But he gave me some incredible, incredible feedback. And I had never met the guy. I still haven't met the guy, but he had a pretty big impact. He was very upfront. So I'd say one was, finding mentors, meeting with them regularly, and then at times where I couldn't, just getting whatever I could get, which was, anonymous feedback online, and in some cases, not anonymous feedback. So that was one. 2 was I actually did take a couple of classes. I took maybe 4 or 5 classes in my last 3 semesters at Carnegie Mellon. I took a couple of human-computer interaction classes. I took a graphic design class. That helped quite a bit. It was just kind of forcing me to stay in practice. And the third thing was I took on some freelance projects. So initially I started by doing it for free. And I know a lot of folks cringe at this idea of working for free, but when you're not very good, you're kind of asking friends for projects, and you're like, look, man, I'll take my time. I'll do it for free, so there's no risk for you, and I get more practice, and it's a win-win. And I was very lucky because I had a few friends who really hooked it up those first few months, and I took on quite a bit of projects those first few months after I left YC and went back to school. And lastly was books. I just read a ton of books. Books were For design, not the most helpful. It was good for some of the high level concepts and like different ways to frame my thinking about design. But ultimately, it was, is what I'm reading about right now applicable to any of my projects? Oftentimes the answer was no, but when it was yes, I really got better at whatever that skill was at the time.
Do you remember which books were really helpful for you?
Well, it was really just the standard design curriculum books, so like the design of everyday things was probably the first one. And then there was the IDEO book. Like, honestly, I can't even remember the title of that one right now.
If you tell me after, we can include it in the show notes.
Yeah, we'll just put it in the show notes. There were just tons of these books. And then there were some amazing ones that I read, not at the very beginning, but that had a bigger impact on me. And my favorite one was The Best Interface is No Interface by Golden Krishna. And I know now everyone's kind of worshiping it into the whole extreme no interface thing. But there are some really good lessons you can take there and incorporate in interfaces, and like limiting them and things like that. But yeah, there are quite a few books where these high-level heuristics really, really played a big part in my design education.
That's great. And it sounds like freelancing was a big part of it too, either, doing it for free, and then you started charging for projects relatively soon after that, right?
Yeah, I would say within the first few months I was charging.
Okay. So just, starting off, initially you're doing free projects for friends. I think we might have even done a project or two together at that period, probably.
I don't even remember anymore. It may have been.
We've done too many. But once you started charging for projects, there's sort of two questions here. One, how did you find those people? Because, for me, doing freelance work was a huge part of how I improved a lot of my content marketing. And for you, it seems like it was big for design. So how did you find the clients that let you practice that? And how did you price yourself? Because I know that's a big question a lot of, especially students have, is they have no idea what to charge for their work.
So initially the way I found folks was just through friends. I told everyone in my closest friend circle that I'm thinking about making this career switch. I'm quite serious about it, which I had to say because I had made like 10 switches before that. So, I had to make sure people knew it was serious this time.
You and I both.
So yeah, I was like, look, I'm pretty serious about this change and it'd be really helpful if you know anybody who needs some free work. And generally it was friends of theirs who were usually working on some kind of side project, some kind of startup of their own and didn't want to invest too much money into it, which was perfect because they didn't need something that was, very high quality, which I couldn't provide at the time, and they didn't have much money to pay for it. And I got to have practice. And because they were friends of friends, they were quite candid with me. So I actually got some pretty great feedback from some of those early clients. I'd say I started charging, within the first few months I started charging, and I started charging very little, at the very beginning. And I slowly ramped it up. And I'm still, even now, slowly increasing my price because as I'm getting better.
What did you start at?
I've always charged for the full project end to end.
Okay.
So I would approximate how many hours it would be. I don't remember exactly what I started at, but it was low. It must have been 20, 25 an hour. Okay. And I would just approximate what the end to end project would be, give them a flat price. But the approximate hourly rate was 20 or 25.
And how did you pick that number? Just talking to friends or?
Pretty arbitrarily, actually.
Nice.
Because I knew everything I'd seen online was charging 80 to 120. And I was like, well, I'm not going to get away with that.
Yeah.
So I just started with something that, the other thing is if you price yourself too low, people assume it's, crap.
Exactly.
So 20 is pretty damn low. I must have figured that below that would be, I just wouldn't be taken seriously.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember the first time that I tried to charge for work, I had no idea what to bill for either. I just picked a number that seemed relatively aggressive in the hopes that they wouldn't negotiate back, and then they didn't, and that was kind of a sign, okay, I probably should have charged more.
We're all just making it up till we're not.
Yeah, pretty much. So you're doing all these freelance gigs and you were still in school at the time. Do you think college was valuable for you? Do you think that you got much out of the classes, or was it just more the environment?
It was definitely more the environment.
Okay.
I did get some stuff out of some classes.
Were there certain classes that, you think of even now as being very valuable to you?
Oh yeah, totally. For what I'm doing directly, the two types of classes that were incredibly valuable, one was programming classes, especially at Carnegie Mellon. They were very challenging. They tanked my GPA, but it was worth it because no one cares about that around here, apparently.
Yeah.
And the second was the design classes because, frankly, especially for the fundamentals, it was very useful. And it validated whether or not I knew what I was doing.
And was there anything not job related that was particularly useful that you took?
Just out of college?
Yeah. So programming and design, they're pretty related to what you're doing now. Was there anything tangential and unrelated that you got a lot out of as a class?
Not out of classes, to be honest, but I met some amazing people. I mean, the one area where whenever it comes up, like, oh, should people go to college? Is it worth it? Obviously, is it worth it is a tough question because $250,000 it's pretty hard to imagine in your head. But I mean, I got a lot out of the environment at college. I met folks like you, really it was just I met a lot of awesome people. I think you could probably get away with not going to college and just living near a college and just going and hanging out in their library and maybe even pretending to be a student.
I mean, we both sort of did that for a year.
We were definitely pretending to be students.
Yeah. So actually on that note, I mean, you took a year off of school, right?
Just a semester.
Oh, it was just a semester. Okay. So I think that this is a topic that ends up coming up a lot with students who are unsure if college feels right for them, where they debate dropping out, or maybe they want to start a project and then they're saying like, oh, well, if I start this project, I want to go in on it, like I have to drop out. Can you speak a little bit about how you sort of dropped out and then just came back?
Specifically, like what my thought process was?
Well, I mean, I think it's something that a lot of people don't realize is an option. Right. So, what did that process look like? Because you left for a semester to do YC, right? And then you were able to come back. So, what made you feel comfortable doing that, taking that time off of school? And then also, how did you manage it with still graduating and like with your parents, especially? Because I feel like the big thing with that is getting over the hurdle with the parents.
Yeah. It was tough both ways. So the reason it was tough to leave was, from the parents' side, it was like this big risk. They were obviously very interested in the fact that we got into YC and had, somehow pulled that off. Yeah. But it was also, especially for my dad, he was very concerned I wouldn't go back to school. Whether or not our company turned out okay, he was just like, boy, if you leave school, are you ever going to be interested in going back? So part of my agreement with him was I will go back no matter what. And, that kind of eased his concerns. There was also a lot of social pressure, right? Because I had switched, my career, like, I don't want to even say career, what I wanted to study or what I thought I wanted to study. Because I had changed my mind so many times, I always felt like my friends at school were always, Adil, whatever, he's just doing another thing. So it was a little weird to leave because, a lot of folks were like, oh, okay, we'll see you in a month. And then we left and, we gave it our all going through YC and working on open curriculum. But frankly, it didn't work out. And then coming back was equally difficult because it was so quick. I came back in like 4 or 5 months or something. And it was a tough decision to decide whether or not to come back to school because I had learned, in those few weeks that I was out in California, I had learned probably more than I had learned in school in the 2.5 years up till that point.
Why do you think that was? What was it about the environment where you learned so much so quickly?
It was just the most challenging thing I had been through until that time, right? It was just working 7 days a week on what seemed like an insurmountable problem, which is selling something that, frankly, it was a very subpar product to people who were not buying things at all. So there was a challenge there. And then there were also like emotional, like psychological things about it, which was, I was thinking about that career change at the time. Right? I was like, is this the right thing for me? Am I, and that part of this, like, in my head stuff from high school, all my friends had done well, I hadn't done so well. Part of my thinking before switching was, am I just giving up on business and business development because I can't do it? Or is it because I actually found something else that I like? So I was always second guessing myself. And especially at that time, what other people thought was like really weighing on me because, it had been such a big part of my life growing up, things like that. So those made it challenging. And then, there was also like the loneliness. Like we went out there and there were just 3 of us working on this company. We lived and worked out of the same place. And especially when it's not going well, there's like a lot of cabin fever. There was a good deal of finger pointing at the time. So coming back was difficult because we had frankly, I felt like I had failed, right? I wasn't sure if I was making the right decision and if I was making it for the right reason. So it was tough both ways.
You mentioned in there the perceptions from other people where you felt like people were expecting you to go down a certain path or maybe judging you for quitting things too quickly. Did you reach a point where you sort of stopped caring about your peers judging you for doing this different stuff, or did it still weigh on you all the way through to graduation?
That's actually the interesting thing. It weighed on me every time I was working on something that I just wasn't really invested in.
Oh, interesting. So it's kind of a barometer for how much you cared about it.
Huh. Exactly. So once I switched into design and started like going heads down on that, especially early on, when I was really not good when I started. I was just pretty terrible. And that was when I actually cared the least because I was having a great time. I was learning incredibly quickly. And I mean, I did get a lot of shit from people who were real designers who were really good.
It's true.
And,
I remember that. Yeah.
And I mean, it was obviously discouraging. I shouldn't say it didn't affect me, but it didn't affect me nearly as much as it had before. And how much it affected me went down with time. Because I was enjoying what I was doing for a change, and I knew that if I dedicated myself, I would do well. And I finally started to understand that flow that everyone that I had been looking up to in all the previous years were into. Because I just hadn't felt the flow till then. That was the problem. I wasn't doing anything I liked, which is why I wasn't working hard. And once I found something I liked, I found it way easier to, if necessary, stay up all night, heads down, working on something because I was genuinely interested in it. I wasn't forcing myself to do something I didn't want to do anymore.
Have you gotten that really intense, passionate flow state from other things too, or is it mostly a design experience?
Career-wise, mostly design.
Okay.
There are like hobbies I have on the side. I really enjoy playing chess. I really enjoy reading. I love running.
Yeah.
Things like that I get that kind of flow state from. But career-wise, up till now, it's mainly been design and a little bit of programming.
A little bit of programming, yeah. I get that from programming too.
Yeah.
I think that's why it's so addicting and easy to get sucked into it, because once you have a basic level of competency, it just feels amazing to go at it for a few hours.
Especially when it finally works.
Oh, yeah. Or when it works the first time and you have no idea why. But it sounds like you didn't have that experience right away. It didn't give you that flow state when you were first starting out doing it, right? Or did it? Yeah.
More so than anything before it, yes.
Oh, okay.
But not to the degree it's at, now, for instance.
But almost off the bat, you felt like you had some relationship with this art.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, no, I mean, like, that's really interesting because I think that a lot of people never search out for something where they have that quick experience. I think for you, it's clearly with design. For me, it's been writing, some of the marketing stuff related to that. For some people, programming, like we said. And it's almost a shame that a lot of people miss the opportunity to go and look for that when they're in school. And I feel like that is a big part of finding something that they're really interested in doing post-graduation. So it sounds like you really focused just on getting good at this. Did you worry about grades or transcript or resume stuff at all?
I definitely worried about grades.
Okay.
Right? I didn't want to have a terrible GPA. I did end up with a pretty bad GPA.
You and I both. It's okay.
But, it's interesting what you just said because, this is something you and I talk about a lot, and I never really realized this, as clearly as what you just said, which is, how the question being is like, how can someone be self-taught, right? And be successful as being self-taught and making that decision about whether or not to go to college and invest all that money. And I think if you're thinking in that realm in the first place as to whether or not it's the right decision for you, or traditional career routes the right thing for you, I would actually say that's 80% of the challenge, is that just having that thought. Because that opens those other doors. And then, if you're lucid, then you can kind of determine, are one of those options the right option for me? But if you are completely closed to it, then you're never going to see it anyway. And that's that conversation I reference, every 5 seconds about the consulting thing.
Yeah. That
was kind of that point for me where I saw those other options, and I feel like that was the biggest leap out of anything else that happened afterwards, where I was like, there are other options outside of engineering, law, and medicine.
Were you ever scared that it wouldn't work out?
Oh, yeah.
So how did you handle that? Because I mean, you were not relying on a degree to get you a job. You weren't hedging on the GPA getting you in the door. So, and I mean, for a lot of people, that's scary. It was scary for me too. How did you manage that? How'd you get over it? If you did?
Well, I knew I was going to have a tough time.
Okay.
So because I switched my junior year, everyone else was going into their last year of internships for design. I was going into my first year of internships for design.
Oh, yeah.
And my skill level was definitely first year level.
Well, and you had basically started learning design junior year.
Yeah.
For the most part.
I was like 6 months in.
Yeah.
So I knew it was going to be tough. I didn't realize how tough it would be. Like the emotional weight of getting rejected by a ton of places is pretty hard to imagine in advance. That was pretty tough, but I knew it was going to be rough. So I applied to a lot of places, and I applied pretty quickly so that all the rejection would come in at once and not discourage me from applying more. So I think I applied to more than 50 places.
Wow. Okay.
I got rejected from basically everywhere.
Damn.
And I knew I would, which is why I did it all at once, because once all the rejections started coming in, I was in no state to keep applying. Once you get like 30 rejections, you're like, well, that's it. I only ended up getting I got less than 5 interviews.
But you still got 5 interviews.
I mean, I got something, yeah. But my point being is like, I knew going in it would be tough, which is why I did it all at once. And had I not done it all at once, I think I probably would have given up and then never gone any interviews because I, maybe only applied to 10 places and then, stuff like that.
Right. So how did you find those places that you ended up applying to?
Well, when you apply to that many places, you kind of apply to everything you've got.
Well, but okay. So I assume you weren't going to the college career fair dressed up in a suit, handing out resumes, right?
No.
Okay.
I started by opening up my phone because I knew I wanted to work in tech. So I applied to every app on my phone. That was my first thing.
That's a cool strategy. Okay. So you open your phone, you've got all these apps, Evernote, Trello, whatever.
Yeah.
Then what? You go try to find them on Angel List and see if they have openings. What was that process like?
Yeah. I don't remember what tool I used, but I would basically just, I'd find the companies that are on my phone and apply to whatever job portal they had. I must have had profiles on like every site, Angel List, LinkedIn, whatever it was. And then another thing I did was I went through, other Y-Combinator alumni who were hiring. So I looked into that. And that was actually how I got my job was I was, looking through those YC companies that were hiring and pinging lots of them.
Yeah.
And then eventually I found a couple matches and picked my favorite.
What about for somebody who doesn't have that alumni network to sink in with? Where do you think they should start looking? The other places you mentioned, like AngelList, LinkedIn, company websites?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you have the ability to be a little picky, then, pick the companies you like. If you use their product, that's a great place to work because you're already a user.
Yeah.
If you were like me and you didn't have that privilege, I mean, frankly, you just kind of have to cast a wide net and see what you catch, right? At that point, it's like, what are companies you've heard good things about? What are companies that are hiring? And, if you're applying to startups, what are startups that aren't going to fail while you're, a lot of companies fail and you can't really know in advance, but you can, you
can make educated guesses. Yeah.
Yeah, you can make educated guesses. Yeah. But, it really, ultimately, my strategy was cast a wide net. It was pretty straightforward, I would say.
Yeah, so at this point, you're pretty much committed. And when you were initially taking some time off of school, going to Y-Combinator, there was probably some sort of conversation with your parents. Were they cool at this point with you going off and working with the startup and not going the traditional route? Was there any more conversations? Did you ever have kind of like a formal conversation about their concerns versus yours? Or were they pretty understanding and on board at that point?
Once I had gotten a job, they were very on board. Even during kind of that recruiting process, because it was pretty quick. It was maybe 6 weeks in which all this took place.
Yeah.
And at the time in undergrad, I wasn't the best at picking up phone calls. So we'd maybe had like 5 or 6 conversations in that time, maybe like once a week. And they were very supportive throughout it because they had realized they were like, okay, for the first time in his life, Adil's putting his head down and working on something. So I think that's kind of the most a parent can ask, right? Is your kid really into whatever they say they want to do? They can't really jump in and get me a job or anything. Well, I guess some parents can, but that wasn't the case in my situation. So I would say it was very amicable. They were quite supportive. And then once I had signed and, it was pretty set that I was going somewhere and that the company was a good company, they were pretty hands off. They were very happy about it.
What about for the parents who are less supportive? I think that we both have friends who want to go after similar roles. Maybe they want to work at startups. They want to do their own thing. They want to work for themselves while traveling, all of that. How do you think they approach those conversations? Like, have you had any experience with your friends managing those kinds of conversations with their parents or heard what's worked or kind of how they've bridged some of that gap?
In my experience, from what I've seen from friends,
yeah,
and this is, very secondhand, so I'm largely speculating here based on what I've heard, but I'd say that it kind of falls into 2 categories. One is parents, ultimately what they're concerned about is my kid going to make money and feed themselves?
Yeah.
Right? Are they going to survive after college?
Are they going to be safe? Yeah.
Exactly. Are they going to be safe, have a place? Are they going to be, bumming money off me, or are they going to be able to support themselves? So I think if you can answer that question in give them the answer they want, which is, hey, like, don't worry, I'll be self-sufficient.
Right.
I think that's one part of it. I think it's more complicated. I've seen friends whose their parents are more interested in status. And status makes it sound negative. It's not even a status thing. It's more like, you're in the social setting with other parents and their kids are going to Harvard Law or, UC Davis for medicine. And they're kind of like, oh, my kid works at a startup.
Yeah.
It just, frankly, just doesn't sound as good. And a lot of parents care a lot about that. Those are the tougher conversations. I didn't have to deal with it, so I'm not the right person to advise, but that is a much tougher situation to be in.
Yeah. What do you think graduating college students owe their parents in terms of jobs and lifestyle?
Are you asking, should they alter their decisions based on
Yeah,
their parents' involvement?
based on what their parents want or what their parents are pushing them towards.
That's really tough.
Yeah.
That's tough. I don't know, man. It really varies. Yeah, it really varies. I have no idea.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a hard question. I think it's
Yeah.
something that a lot of students end up like grappling with.
Even in those situations, parents want the best for their kids. And maybe I'm being naive here, but I really think if you can demonstrate that like you're going to have a good life doing what you're doing, that most parents will be on board. But I'm very speculative there.
Yeah, that's true. So we talked a little bit. I mean, I think we touched on this briefly with some of the difficulties of feeling like you don't fit in the college process in the same way that maybe all of your peers in the environment pushes you to. Was there anything that helped you feel more okay during college with not being so focused on grades, classes, academics, all of that stuff? Like, was there a point when you became less, like, I guess, insecure and worried about not fitting the traditional mold? Like, what made you more comfortable with it?
To be honest, it was when I knew I was going to be able to feed myself. It was like I got in a job, I knew I was going to get paid, and I was like, even if I wasn't making as much as my friends who were, say, going into finance, I was at least enjoying what I was doing.
Yeah, that's true.
Not to say they weren't, but I was doing something that I enjoyed, and I wouldn't enjoy what they were doing.
Yeah.
And not to jump back and forth, but to your last question about parents,
We can jump around.
The easy answer is do what you want.
Yeah.
Because chances are you'll outlive your parents. And if you do exactly as they say, you may resent them if it's contrary to what you want to do. But I think the flip side of it is that like parents have some pretty sage wisdom. And I've seen time and time again where I've like distinctly disobeyed my parents, especially on issues related to, girlfriends and things like that.
Yeah.
And they were definitely right. So it's kind of striking a balance there as to, on what issues do you want to listen? And I think the right question to ask there, because I think it varies is kind of a cop-out answer.
Mm-hmm.
I think the right question is do you want your parents' life? And what parts of their life do you want? And if the topic you guys are in disagreement about, if going their route, you don't want their outcome, then maybe you don't want to listen to their advice. And if you want their outcome, then that's probably something you want to take a little bit more seriously.
Yeah.
And there are probably more tactful ways to word this and, actually bring it up in a conversation, or maybe not. But yeah, I think a big part of it is like, parents have experienced a lot. They're like, double our age or more.
Right.
But ultimately it's like, do you want the life that they had?
I think it's hard too, because a lot of, especially this job and work stuff, I mean, the kinds of things that both of us do didn't exist 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that there's definitely some parents to different degrees are going to be more, not naive, but less exposed to different ways of like making money and being comfortable and working that are available today.
Our parents also had parents.
Yeah.
Right. So an interesting thing that is like, what conflicts did they have with their parents?
Well, and their parents grew up in the Great Depression, or they immigrated to the US, or like completely different worlds. And if you grew up in Great Depression US, or if you immigrated here from Asia, India, Pakistan, wherever, you're going to have a very different outlook towards money and risk than a well-educated student from, middle class or whatever, right? Like you can afford to take a lot more risks than they did in most cases. Yeah.
And I mean, for my parents, my dad, was working in semiconductors. A lot of what he was working on didn't exist for his parents,
right?
Who were much older. I think my dad's father was in his mid 40s and my dad was born, something like that, and was growing up in Pakistan. It was a very different environment than me and my dad in Silicon Valley, where things are changing very rapidly and he's more used to it.
Yeah, that definitely helps. I mean, I know for my parents, they were both lawyers. And so they had very kind of like risk-averse profiles, right? It's a good risk-averse profession. So me going to what's kind of like stereotypically higher risk, like it took some getting used to for them.
Well, how'd you convince them? Let's flip the chat.
Now you're interviewing me. Oh man, I don't know that I ever really did convince them. I think it helped that
even now.
Well, I think they got used to it more so on maybe my dad's side than my mom's side, because my mom was always not I think, a great student either. And she was very similar to me in that regard. Whereas my dad was very like amazing student, Harvard Law School, like super smart dude. And so I think maybe it was hard for him to understand me not prioritizing grades and prioritizing other things. And I think that what really showed him that I was going to be okay was, junior year when you were doing Y-Combinator, and I also dropped out of college for a year to work on my startup, and we raised money. And I think that was probably the first point when he saw like, okay, he'll probably be okay. I think the second and third times were getting freelance gigs that paid well, and then getting my job right out of college, where that was very much something that kind of it wasn't like I was trying to get jobs and like applying to tons of places. It was something that just kind of happened. And I think that made him feel like way more secure. So I think you're right. I think the money is a big part of it.
Yeah, it sounds like the money is a big validator.
I think that that's probably what the parents worry about most, is knowing that like their kid is going to be financially solvent.
Knowing they can retire.
Yeah. Knowing they're not going to spend their retirement savings taking care of you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's another interesting thing too, is that there's so many kids who graduate college and then end up having to go home, and they either can't get the kinds of jobs that they were hoping to out of college, or they have to take very kind of like working at Starbucks or something, because a lot of the skilled labor is just harder for them to get than they expected, or their diplomas didn't prepare them for that, right? Do you think that it's naive to rely on your diploma to get you a job?
It really depends on the diploma.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's just no better answer to that, right? Like,
yeah. Well, no, I think that's true. I mean, I guess what I would say is, do you think that you get more in terms of like design skills for going into work like you're doing from doing these side projects and freelance gigs, or would just studying it in college and focusing on that provide the same level of skill and education?
For design,
yeah,
as just design as a field, it really boils down to your work.
Okay.
So for me, my diploma, I mean, I didn't even see it when I had applied to. I hadn't even graduated yet when I got my offer.
Right.
I don't think my employer still knows my major or my GPA or the classes I took. So it really varied, but they know the work that I did, which is what mattered for design.
Did you profile that anywhere? Like, what did you do with your work? How did they see it? Do you just have a portfolio? Did you put it up on your site?
Oh yeah, we can go down the design recruiting rabbit hole, but basically, I had a portfolio, and then you have the other offline materials that you email to folks, who you're recruiting with, so they can check it out. Sometimes you change it based on the company, just so it's, more relevant to whatever job you're applying for.
Got it. Yeah. Because I mean, it was pretty similar with writing too. It's like having that body of work online made a really big difference.
Well, it's kind of like what you talk about when people apply for that job you were discussing and they have these certificates.
Yeah.
You're like very skeptical, but then if they say, here's my writing, here are the numbers on my site, then you trust it.
Exactly.
So like I could have taken a bunch of design classes, have no portfolio, or I could have a portfolio of good work and have no design classes. Yeah. People are going to care more about the work.
And I mean, a lot of programmers do that too with like their GitHub accounts and doing open source work. And I think it's a really easy, high leverage way to put some of your work out there, right? Just like having it public.
Well, that end, it was interesting. In some cases, not having a degree has actually helped. And this is where, this can either be in conversations with, other designers or, other folks, or when recruiting, which is, if you go in and you don't have a diploma and you have decent work, the message it's sending is, look, I'm taking this very seriously. Like, not only am I finishing this irrelevant diploma so that I can graduate, I'm also working on this stuff on the side. And I think that really helps, because it's like, look, I really care about this. I'm putting in the evenings and the weekends instead of spending it in, fraternity basements or something.
Yeah, that makes sense. So how did you balance that then? Because you were taking classes.
And I was in fraternity basements with you.
and you were doing this freelance work and learning stuff on the side. I mean, that's a lot. And you were in a relationship, and it's like a lot of plates to keep spinning. Like, how did you manage that?
What suffered most was my classes. Something has to give.
Yeah.
So what suffered most were my classes, because I decided that was going to be least relevant towards whether or not I got a good job. So I was putting in the least there. And there was one semester, the semester I was recruiting, where I deliberately was taking easy classes because I knew I was going to have a tough time. So I would say, like, plan accordingly, right? It's always easy to plan ahead and be like, you know what, I'm going to be so on top of my game next semester, and then you're never on top of the game. So yeah, something has to give.
Yeah. And actually, I mean, taking an easier major, easier classes can definitely help with that.
Oh yeah, I mean the major I finally went through with was definitely on the easier side.
What did you end up graduating with?
Should I even name it? I've been insulting it all. It wasn't that bad. It was actually fairly interesting. It just wasn't relevant to my field. It was called decision science. Basically, it was psychology, stats, and some behavioral economics.
Yeah.
And it was fascinating. It just wasn't what I wanted to do. There were a lot of people who really enjoyed it. So I really shouldn't be going so hard on it.
No, it's interesting stuff. It's like Daniel Kahneman and Cialdini and all those folks.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
yeah. I mean, definitely like changing pace quite a bit here, but we've talked a little bit about some of the difficult stuff with college, and how, some of the pressure from peers to go down a certain route, some from parents, from the university. Was depression ever a big issue for you during college through all this?
It was. There was one point where it was very relevant towards career. And that was when I was recruiting to a bunch of places and getting nothing.
Yeah.
Especially because the positive feedback that I eventually did get was, towards the tail end of that. And it was only like 6 weeks, but it felt like forever. Looking back, it felt like a very long time. And that was where, it was a lot of time pressure because the end of the semester was approaching, internships were closing up. And this was, if I had not pulled that off, like if I hadn't like gotten a job, then that was where conversations with my parents would get pretty tough.
Yeah.
Because that's where they'd be like, okay, look, like we've supported you for the last year. We've been pretty hands off, but you need a job. You're graduating in a year.
Right.
And that's where I kind of lose the argument of I can do it if I've applied to 80 places and I haven't. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think like eventually you do have to be self-sufficient. You have to be realistic. So if I hadn't gotten any job, I think at that point my question would have been like, can I get to a point where I'm doing what I enjoy doing and making money, or do I need to be practical and make money in some other way? Because I graduated with $70,000 in loans. Like they're not going to pay themselves, and it would be, pretty terrible for me to call my parents, be like, "Hey, thanks for covering most of college. Here's a bunch more. Like, by the way, can I live in the garage?"
Yeah.
Like, I think there's a pursue your dream line of reasoning is great.
Mm-hmm.
I also think there has to be some dose of realism where it's like, okay, like, is it going to happen?
Right. It's almost like insurance backup.
Exactly.
Plan, right?
Yeah.
Did you have that? What was that for you?
Insurance?
Yeah.
Honestly, I didn't.
Oh, okay.
Not at the time.
So it was really like all in.
Yeah, I planned pretty terribly, but also, it was fairly on in the recruiting season, right?
Yeah.
Like it was like basically the first 6 weeks of what could have been a few months.
But to be fair, you could have always done freelance design work, right?
I wasn't making enough money off that at the time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
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 So
I guess, but here's the other thing is focusing on insurance, and I know I'm contradicting myself a little bit here, and this is where it all becomes it depends, you got to strike a balance, but
right.
And I think when you jumped into marketing, I guess you had the insurance of consulting sort of, right?
I was kind of in the same boat as you where, okay, I could charge $150 per article, but that requires a lot of articles per month to completely sustain your stuff on it.
Insurance is an opportunity cost, especially that early on.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of, there's classes, relationships, social life, career prospects. Adding on insurance, like backup career prospects, then you're really stretching yourself thin. And if the opportunity cost is that high, then putting the backup in could, really hamper your ability to not make that, career change or, whatever it is you're trying to do. So,
well, there can also be some
So I totally contradicted myself there.
Well, no, I mean, there's both sides to it, right? Because obviously it sucks to know you have no other option, but also, I mean, there can be some value to burning your boats, right? To saying that,
it forces your hand.
Exactly. It's like, I have to make this work.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's easy for us to say as people that it worked out for, right?
Well,
like, there's some
I think it's easy
survivorship
for us,
bias.
even if it hadn't worked out for us. And this is where I feel a little bit of like, a little bit of like a fraud. Even if it hadn't worked, and even if we didn't want to go to our parents for help, I think you and I always had the option, which made us a little bit more risk-seeking.
Yeah.
So I think it's a little hard for you and me to sit here and try to speculate on what is the best insurance plan for someone who doesn't have the fallback of their parents.
Right. But no, I mean, I think that's really true, right? It's kind of like you have to evaluate it on your situation. And also how much of a fallback you're willing to risk, like while going after it.
Yeah.
But going back to sort of what prompted that, I mean, you mentioned that it was really hard, like getting rejected by these 35 some places before you finally got that. Like, how did you deal with that?
I've never been very good at dealing with that. I basically didn't deal with it, to be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, I was very busy with school stuff, work stuff. I probably had some freelance stuff on the side. I don't remember ever deliberately thinking about it. I remember feeling it and then just putting my head down on whatever it was on my plate at the time.
Yeah. So I feel like it seems like such a common issue in college, right?
Yeah.
The work stuff, I mean, whether it's this or traditional work, pursuing just like leading to this like really difficult to handle depression. And I mean, it was definitely a problem for me. Sounds like, something you experienced too. And did you ever kind of develop something that helped you manage?
Yeah,
like,
that was
kinds of,
exactly what just came to mind was like the one thing I was, I wouldn't say good at, but like decent at was compartmentalize. That's the wrong word. Kind of breaking the issue down.
Okay.
So that's where I would sit down and be like, okay, like this sucks.
Yeah.
I'm getting rejected from a bunch of places. And then I would kind of break it down to its line items, which is like, why does this suck, right? Well, I really want to do design, but I'm getting rejected from a bunch of places. And here's why I'm getting rejected, like, X, Y, Z. And then I'll just, focus on those things. And breaking it down to those small bits definitely helped because it didn't make the whole problem seem so insurmountable.
Right.
It was still depressing. And I still would say I was pretty bad at dealing with it, but I was pretty good at isolating the causes. And I would say, knowing that is important. And if I could go back and like give myself some advice, or if I was to face that again, then my advice would be like, okay, like if you know what the issue is, then, fix it. Right. Or, there are some tangential things you can do, right? Like now when I experience any kind of depression, now I'm a lot better at like, going, for me, like what really helps is running and meditating. Right.
Okay.
And I find running to be very meditative. So just meditating basically.
Yeah.
Journaling really helps. Just getting all these things down on paper. And ultimately, I think a big part of at least my depression has been, a lot of causes has been, organizing my thoughts because they're kind of in a flurry in my head and it feels like a lot more than it is. And once you break it down to its individual components, it becomes a little easier to deal with, a little less intimidating.
Do you have a habit for that, like a daily journaling exercise, or is it just kind of when it hits you?
Mostly when it hits me. I wouldn't say it's not daily. It's not that regular.
Right.
But it's semi-regular. I use Day One.
What's Day One?
Oh, it's a journaling app on my computer.
Got it.
And, I have like a daily reminder. I usually ignore it, but I generally write when things are bad.
Yeah.
Something I've been trying to be more deliberate about is writing when things are good and just imagining what a better something could be like.
So if you were going to go back to freshman year Adil and give him some advice on, making the most of the college process, surviving it, like being happier during it, and like, what do you think you would say to him? Butterfly effects aside, right?
I think all of my screwing up was kind of necessary. It's a little hard. I think if I went back and like, because part of what was valuable was like experiencing what it felt like to screw up the way I screwed up. Like I said, a big part of my freshman year psyche was I'd always felt a little overshadowed by some of the people I grew up with because they were able to kind of, sit down and just do the work and do well. And that was just not something I was ever good at if I wasn't interested in what I was doing. I think it'd be tough for me to go back and be like, hey, open up your mind, right? If there was one thing I would say is, just, this is so cheesy.
No, you can
I was just going to say, meet a ton of people so that you can, I think going up to a freshman and being like, hey, open your mind. They're going to be like, okay. Right?
Like, do I take acid?
Yeah. My conduit was meeting a lot of people who were doing different things.
Okay.
And then, once I saw the different things they were doing, I saw that the world was bigger than just a couple of career paths.
Got it.
So, I mean, it really is just meet a lot of people. As cheesy as that's the only thing I can think of telling my freshman year self that would have helped.
And you also mentioned that some of the screw-ups were necessary.
It was very necessary.
So what do you think would be maybe 1, 2, or 3 of those big screw-ups that were necessary?
I mean, hindsight bias, right? There's also a bit of narrative fallacy here, which is like, I don't think all my screw-ups really led into each other. They were just a series of disjointed accidents.
Well, they don't have to lead into each other. Just, because I think this is, one thing where people are maybe hard on themselves for, especially in college and especially with social media and everything. It's like everybody else has this perfect idyllic life and I'm over here not knowing what to do and screwing up and stuff. So I mean, like, what do you think was useful for you, like wasting time on or mistakes you made, things like that, since you opened the door on it?
Yeah. I don't know if this counts as advice I would give myself, but
Yeah,
I
it
think
doesn't have to
doing
be.
those side projects were really key.
And you would count those as screw ups?
Well, they were not screw-ups. They
Okay.
didn't end well, but they weren't screw-ups. They
So
were very
even
valuable.
though they failed or got shut down or you quit them.
Screw-up is the wrong word.
Okay.
I shouldn't have said that. They just didn't end well. That was
Got
the thing. They weren't, it wasn't a big success that allowed me to quit college and, forego getting a job or anything like that. But they were all very valuable, even Six-Pack.
Yeah. The running butt joke of all of our side projects.
The running butt joke of the last 5 years.
Because I mean, for both of us, I mean, I've quit or shut down all but 2 projects that I started in college. I mean,
Yeah.
have you kept any of them running?
No, they're all dead.
Yeah.
I learned a lot from them.
But you
they're
still
all-
learned a lot from
they're
them,
all
right? They were
gone,
still
yeah.
valuable. So,
Moment of silence.
like, so, I mean, you would basically say something like, don't go in with the mentality that it has to succeed, right?
Yeah.
Or
I think part of I definitely thought they were going to succeed each time.
that's true. Yeah.
I think you need to go in thinking it'll succeed. You just have to be open to it not succeeding, right? You can't if something is failing, you have to recognize it for what it is and move on, which I think I was pretty decent at. But I've seen a lot of people not. They're like, oh yeah, I'm going to make it work. I'm going to eat glass, Elon Musk style, and this is going to work. It's like, sometimes it's not going to work, and that's fine.
I mean, I feel like
Yeah.
we've both gotten pretty good at quitting stuff.
That's our best skill.
Much to the chagrin of our parents and the judgment of our peers. How do you know when to quit something then? Because, and this could be like a side project or it could be a major. I mean, you quit like a dozen majors?
Yeah,
or
something like that.
No, but seriously, right? Because I think people do get stuck in the trap, especially when it comes to startup entrepreneurship stuff. They're like, oh, I've got this amazing idea and here we go. And it's not really going anywhere. And then you still see them doing it 2 or 3 years later, right?
Yeah.
Like, when do you know when to quit something?
For me, it's when I hate myself.
Oh, interesting.
It's just, not when I hate myself. That's,
Well, you mentioned
exactly,
the fearing people's judgment before, right? Is that kind of your barometer of it?
Only in hindsight, I would say. I would say in the moment when I decided to quit anything I was working on was when I no longer enjoyed working on it.
That makes sense.
And it wasn't even that immediate. It wasn't like, I stopped and now, I stopped enjoying it. And immediately I was like, I've stopped enjoying this. It was usually like a few weeks in and I was like, wow, I've hated this for a while.
Yeah.
And then, in some cases, I didn't even willingly or deliberately shut it down. It was more like I had just stopped working on it because I wasn't interested. And I was like, well, I'm not working on it, so it's dead.
Yeah.
Oops.
Well, I think that's scary to some people, though, especially when you're moving from the traditional kind of college mentality of you can never let something fail. You have to get A's all the time.
Yeah.
That's a good question. Do you remember the first time you let a project die? Not get an A. I know that hasn't happened yet. But
I got a couple.
yeah, I got a few.
The first time I let a project die.
Yeah, or when was that always something you were comfortable with? Was it something that you kind of had to get used to? Because for some people, that idea is really scary.
Yeah, no, I wasn't comfortable the first time. The first time I let something, I don't want to say let something die. The first time I acknowledged I had failed at something, and that sounds so negative. The first time I acknowledged that something wasn't working, right?
Yeah.
This was actually in high school. It wasn't even a side project. I did debate after school, and I got kicked off the team for not working very hard.
Okay.
And I totally deserved it. And it was, so debate was a really big thing at my high school. We had, 1,600 kids at the school, and 400 of them did speech and debate.
Wow.
So,
okay.
And we were the largest team in the country, and I got kicked off for being lazy, and I was actually in a leadership position, and I remember I was told I was a bad role model. So, yeah. Yeah. So that one was tough. And then after that was kind of my barometer, because after that it was like, well, this was very public. All my friends were doing this and I got kicked out. I'd beg my way back in. I remember I went to my coach and I was like, look, I'm going to work hard. Just take me back. After that, nothing was as embarrassing,
Yeah.
right? Like, and this was something I really wanted to do well at, debate. I think I wanted that more than most of my side projects in college. So it made shutting those down or acknowledging they weren't working a lot easier. And because I was able, like in high school, I had gotten kicked off, but then I got back on the team and eventually did fairly well.
Mm-hmm.
So I had this belief, because I was lucky enough to have that experience in high school that like, yeah, it's fine if this doesn't go well now, something else might go well later. So part of it is luck, right? Like that's kind of, I don't think I would have come to that thought on my own if it hadn't happened by chance, right? Like a lot of things could have gone differently. I could have been kicked off and then not tried to get back on. I could have been kicked off, tried to get back on the team and not been accepted. And all those things could have changed my attitude towards it. So I do think a big part of it is luck. Like someone listening to your podcast, I think is already most of the way there. They've probably had an experience like this. They're probably looking for more of a how-to, or maybe I shouldn't speculate on that.
That could be anywhere.
Yeah, it could be anything. But those experiences, and they're largely chance, are a big part of it. And finding a way to make those happen or looking for a way to make them happen is really tough.
Yeah. Well, they can only really happen if you're doing some of these projects, right?
Yeah.
So like you kind of have to open yourself up to the opportunity to let them happen. So, I mean, it sounds like speech and debate was a really big thing for you then.
Yeah, it was a pretty big part of growing up for me.
Yeah. So do you see yourself doing anything speech and debate related, like going back into politics? Because you've mentioned it a few times so far.
No. I mean, back into politics is the wrong way, is into.
Back into being interested in pursuing it.
It's just into politics. No, I like my privacy.
That's fair.
It also is an issue of like, is that even an option, right? Like,
I have all this embarrassing dirt on you now.
Yeah, and this.
Yeah. Although, the current elections status, nothing is embarrassing anymore.
Yeah, so. I can get away with just about everything.
Yeah, it's kind of freeing, isn't it? Yeah. So, I mean, I think that, like, obviously we've covered a lot. I think there's a lot of stuff really valuable for people here. Is there any just like last bits of things that you wish you had known, or that you frequently tell students who are still in college who kind of are frustrated with the system that they feel stuck in, that you think is valuable, or just like recommendations of books, resources, things that were really useful to you, like anything else that you think would be valuable to, people in this mindset, really getting after it, being more comfortable with it?
Yeah, I would say two things. One is, if you think you're interested in something, do it and validate it, or do it and invalidate it, and do it as quickly as you can. And it's fine if it's haphazard. Mm-hmm. So if you think you're into design, for instance, just pick up, your friend's club logo or something small and just see if you actually enjoy doing it or not. That's one.
Yeah.
And two is, if you have validated whatever you think it is you want to do, then find a mentor, like find a human being you can talk to face to face, and follow their lead very closely. I think it's pretty hard to get away with anything without a mentor.
Yeah.
If I think if I didn't have any I could have done everything else I named. If I hadn't had mentors, I don't think I would have, gotten a job and become a designer. I think I would probably be spinning my wheels doing something else.
That makes sense. I think that's like great, super valuable advice. So thank you, Adil, for coming on for episode 1. This is a lot of fun. I think we're going to maybe go drink more wine, hang out some more. But yeah, I mean, I'll have all of the resources, information from this in the show notes. People will be able to find you. Oh yeah, where should people find you?
I'm on Twitter. My handle is my name, Adil Majid, and I have a website.
ADILMAGID.
JID.
JID.
Yeah, it's been 5 years.
I said JID.
You said G.
I'll go edit
have
it out.
Recorded.
I can re-record it and put it back in.
I have a website, which is exactly the same thing. I really don't put much online, but if anybody is interested in, learning about design, they want any kind of mentorship, they can just DM me on Twitter, and I'm very responsive.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Adil. And let's go have more wine.
Yeah. Thanks, Nat.
All right. Cheers. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Nat Chat. If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe to Nat Chat in iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. Second, if you're trying to take advantage of some of the information from this episode, be sure you check out the show notes at nateliason, nateliason.com/podcast, and find a friend, because implementing a lot of this stuff is much easier if you have somebody to do it with. And finally, if you enjoyed this episode and you've been enjoying other episodes of the podcast, please leave it a review on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you listen to your casts so that more people can find it. This is the best way for it to get some more exposure and to make sure that I can keep bringing these episodes to you. With that, thank you and have an awesome rest of your day.